can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy.
I'm going to go into a bit of the social side here because I'm always fascinated with it.
Yeah.
Was there much banter between other aircraft types and squadrons, and what was the food like?
Okay. Yes. When we had Tomcats in the air wing, it was obviously a big rivalry between Tomcats and Hornets. Part of that was jealousy, I think, on the Hornets squadron's part, and it's not for what most people would think was, oh yeah, well, the Tomcat's superior fighter. No, we all at that point have believed that the Hornet was superior, but we were jealous because they had twice as many officers in their squadron. So they had a pilot and they had a Rio, and so we just had a pilot. We were a single seat, and so when we had maybe 10 junior officers, they had 20, and so for all the jobs, the coffee mess officer, the line division officer, all that stuff, they had more officers to do that. So it seemed to me they were having more fun because they didn't have as much work to do. And the Hornet guys got a reputation for being a little bit more, I don't know, what's the word I want to, uptight, I guess is the word I want to use. They're a little more uptight because, it's like we're working all the time and we're not having as much fun as a Tomcat guys. So there's a rivalry there. And then obviously when you get in the air, there's the natural tendency to want to show who's the better fighter pilot. And within our community itself, Hornet squadron versus a Hornet squadron, there's always a rivalry, and it's good natured, and it is really designed to make you better. In every ready room, there's this thing called a greenie board. And the greenie board, because I mentioned before about boat grades, every landing on an aircraft carrier is graded. And so it's on a 4.0 scale. So an okay pass is a 4.0, a fair pass is a 3.0. You've got a no grade, which is a 2.0. A bolter is a 2.5. So if you miss a wire, it's kind of in between a no grade and a fair. And then I can't remember what else. There's a cut pass, which is bad. But so you have these grades, and they're noted by color. So green is an okay pass. So the more green you have on the board, the better your grades are. And on this board, you have every pilot in the squadron listed, and you have every single one of their landings, and it shows, you'd see green, you'd see yellow, you'd see brown, and so anytime you walk into another ready room, your first thing you do is you look at the greenie board and you see right now, or and so there's that tendency to man, I don't want to be that guy that everyone goes to my ready room and says, man, he's really struggling right now. And so there's always just that constant competition. But in general, we're all friends, and we get to port, we're all having fun together. The food on the carrier, that was the second part of your question, it was really dependent upon the carrier and also who the guy in charge of it was. The carriers, there's two wardrooms that we could eat in. The forward wardroom, they call it, which is up on the O3 level, which is the level where most of the officer staterooms are, and kind of where all the ready rooms are. In the forward part of the ship, they used to call it the dirty shirt wardroom, and that was because that was the only wardroom that you could wear flight deck jerseys or flight suits in. If you went down to the XO's wardroom, which was more for ship's company, you had to be in khakis. You had to be in an actual uniform to use that. That's no longer the case. You could actually go to the XO's wardroom in a flight suit, but the ship's company people tended to go there more, and most of the air wing people went to the forward wardroom more. And we had it used to be called mess specialist. Now it's a CS, culinary specialist. We had a guy that was in our squadron that sort of ran the forward wardroom, and he was phenomenal. He would have a Mongolian barbecue night where
Oh,
you
wow.
know, he would have all the different meats and vegetables, and you could pile it on a plate, and then they cook it up for you and give it to you. The food was incredible on that cruise when we had that guy. But in general, they fed you really well. There was always food to eat. The only time there was ever really any kind of angst when it came to food was when the ice cream machine broke, and we called it the dog machine because it was soft serve ice cream that looked like, you can
Yeah,
imagine.
yeah.
But when that broke, that was like the biggest angst that we would have. And I on my first deployment with those 201 guys who were those reservists. Again, most of them were airline pilots. Most of them are in pilot unions. And so they were not opposed to doing strikes, if you will. They wanted to basically protest the fact that the ice cream machine, the dog machine, was not working. And so they said, we're all going to go down to the XO's wardroom, and we're going to sit in a chair, and we're not going to get up until someone from the air wing replaces us, so that all the ship's company people don't have a place to sit. And you'd see these guys, the surface warfare officers walking with a tray of food, looking around, and there's no seats. And we're just sitting down there playing cards and, smoking and joking and having a good time. And finally the ship said, okay, what do you guys want? And we want the ice cream machine fixed. And so they fixed it.
That's awesome. So how long does an actual cruise last?
Yeah, I mean, it's 6 to 8 months in general, from when you leave the U.S. to when you get back, and it always depends. You can get extended because the carrier that's supposed to replace you is late getting there, and so hey, you're going to extend 2 more months, or some geopolitical reason. We need to have maybe 2 carriers here now, so we're going to stay there a bit longer. So. But in general, I'd say 6 to 8 months. It started to gravitate more towards the 10-month, towards the end of my time. But those 10 months or whatever are broken up, where you'll have a period of time where you're on station, flying combat missions, and then you're going to pull out, and then you're going to go to port for a week or so to have some R&R, and then you go back on station. And I don't remember what the days is now, but there's, I think this is unlike, the British Navy. We don't have alcohol on our ships, so we don't have a bar, we don't have pubs, we don't, it's forbidden to have alcohol on the ship, except for if you are at sea for, I can't remember if it was 30 days straight without a port call, or it could have 60 days. I can't remember what it was, but when you go over that, we would have what's called a beer day. And you got tickets for 2 beers, and you could go turn those tickets in. You could have your beers, and then that was it. But you end up finding ways of having fun.
Yeah.
Even within the confines of the rules that are setting out for you.
Well, you probably have many, Jack, but can you maybe share a few stories, memorable stories from your time flying the Hornet?
I'd say most of my memorable stories really revolve around combat missions, because those are the ones that stick out in my mind. I'll tell you the one. I already mentioned the one about the surface-to-air missile and flying through, but the part I didn't tell you on that mission is, so as I'm flying through the missile engagement zone, it's nighttime. I'm on my night vision goggles. I'm looking around, for missile launches because I'm afraid of getting shot down. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a blossom of light kind of in the general area of where the surface-to-air missile site that I was targeting was located. So in the corner of my eye, I see this blossom of light. I glance over it quickly with my goggles, and it looks like basically a rocket launch. It looks like a plume. And so I, immediately, heads up, missile launch, and I start turning away and defending. And my flight lead, who was a very experienced Top Gun instructor, or Top Gun graduate, and he he said, "Hey man, that's your bomb blowing up." And I look down at my display where my forward-looking infrared, and I see what I thought was a plume was actually all the bomblets from the JSOW detonating on the missile site. So I felt kind of silly at that, but. So things like that were memorable because it kind of injected a little bit of levity into a very stressful, tense situation. Other times on other deployments, especially the next one, we were dropping bombs. We went with bombs every single time. We were on call, close air support. That cruise was from the North Arabian Gulf, flying into Iraq from the south, and but ROE was so restrictive that. They mainly had us doing what they called pipeline recce's. They were afraid of insurgents, destroying the Iraqi infrastructure, which would kind of delay the rebuilding of the country. And so they wanted us to kind of fly down these pipelines and make sure that people weren't setting, explosives and trying to destroy it, sabotage it, or whatever. And every once in a while, we would get called in to do a show of force for, an allied convoy that maybe was, traveling along a road, and there would be, a vehicle tailing them that they didn't know who it was. And so they would call us in like, "Hey, can you do a show of force?" All they wanted us to do was fly really low, really fast, put out some flares, scare them, just so that somebody that wants to do something bad, they know we see them and they're not going to get away with it. So that's what we got a call from this convoy one time, and they said that, "Hey, there's a truck that's been following us. It's staying about, I don't know, a couple clicks back. Every time they stop, it would stop. Every time they'd move, it would move." And it was just kind of staying in the same position. So they were getting nervous. And so my wingman and I decided we're gonna do a show of force. We're gonna fly down either side of this truck, and our lights are off. We're going to fly down either side of it, just right above the ground. And the minute we get to, even with the truck, we're going to plug in our afterburners, and then we're going to pull up. And so I can just imagine I think it's probably a farmer or something. He was just trying to go to market. Yeah. Didn't want to get too close to the American convoy and get shot. So he's going to stay back. But I could just picture him sitting in the truck, and all of a sudden these two jets go screaming by, blue afterburner flames, because I look over my shoulder and he like swerved off the road and ended up in a ditch.
Wow.
Felt bad for him, but yeah. So stuff like that was kind of the memorable stories.
Yeah, absolutely, great stuff. But how many hours did you get on the Hornet? And I have to ask, do you have a favorite squadron that you flew on?
Yeah, the Hornet, I ended up with about 2,500 hours. And I'd say my favorite squadron was the one I spent the most time in, the last one, VFA 204. I was there for 13 years. I was there so long that when I was a commander in the squadron, and I remember one of the newer guys came in and came up to me and said, "Hey, there's a squadron picture, with all the pilots down in the maintenance office, and this guy looks just like you, and he's a lieutenant." I'm like, "Yeah, that was me." He's like, you've been here since you were a lieutenant? I'm like, "Yeah, been here a long time." But it was a great squadron. We did, our mission, we were adversaries. So we got to travel all over the country. We went to Alaska, we went to Guam, just training up the fleet squadrons in, air to air stuff. So the flying was always fantastic. It was a great group of guys. And it just felt good. It felt like home, being in that squadron. When I joined it, we were flying the A+ model. When I left, we were flying the C models. We did have some 2-seat, D model Hornets that was able to take people flying in, which was pretty cool. And then I left, and now they're flying the F5. So it's a little bit different, but that was probably my favorite squadron.
Great stuff. So yeah, what did you do after your Hornet career? Were you still in the military? And maybe you can sum up what you did.
So I actually flew the Hornet all the way up until my retirement. As far as other tours go, so I did two operational squadrons, VF 87 and VF 82. between those two squadrons, I had 3 cruises on aircraft carriers. I had the Theodore Roosevelt was the first one with 87, and then with 82, I was on the Enterprise and then the Abraham Lincoln. And the Lincoln was the only one that didn't go to the Middle East. We did a Western Pacific cruise, and we ended up responding to the tsunami in Indonesia in 2005. So primarily a lot of humanitarian aid stuff on that deployment. And then from there, I did a instructor tour in the T-45. I went back to Kingsville as an instructor and really used my boat experience to help guys get ready to go to the carrier. So I did every single CQ carrier qualification detachment that we had. It was probably my favorite thing about being an instructor was taking a student who I remember being petrified, walking out to the jet that first day, and then watching them have this swagger as they walk back. They went out timid and they came back like King Kong. It was awesome every single time. And so I did that for a couple of years. I did an Admiral's Aid tour, which was theoretically would have been non-flying, but it was in New Orleans where VFA 204 was located, and it was with a reserve admiral. And so 204 was being a reserve squadron, kind of fell under his purview. So he got me all trained up again in the Hornet so that I could fly with them. I became a guest pilot with that squadron, and then I joined that squadron in 2009 and went to Top Gun. Started doing just the adversary mission with 204, and then I had a couple deployments that we called them individual augmentee assignments, where you get kind of plucked out of your squadron and put into a role. So in 2010, I was pulled out of my squadron and sent to Afghanistan with an Air Force Tactical Air Control Party. So I was attached to the Army's 82nd Airborne on the ground, calling in airstrikes and basically being, the ground force commander's liaison with anything air related. So the Navy's intent was to send me there so that more Navy aircraft would get used, but that was kind of a stupid idea because all the Navy aircraft were on carriers and could only give you maybe 20 minutes of on-station time. But I had Air Force jets that were, in Kandahar that would give me a couple hours. So of course I'm going to use the Air Force, so I did that. That mission ended up kind of springboarding me into my next deployment in 2015 when I did joint counterterrorism stuff with a special operations task force in Africa. So each time I'd the Hornet, and so after that last deployment I went back to 204 and was flying the Hornet the day before my retirement.
And I think 204 and certainly Top Gun deserves a separate episode, that's for sure.
Yes.
But then absolutely. But you've kind of got a second career, and it's probably like where our viewers know you from, because you became an author of the Battleborn series. Can you tell us about this and how you became an author?
Yeah. So first of all, I didn't want to be an airline pilot when I left active duty. So I went into business and realized I didn't want to work for a living. So then I decided I was going to go back to flying. And so I became an airline pilot. But the one great thing about being an airline pilot is that it gives me a lot of opportunity to have free time. On my overnights in hotels, I could sit there and turn on the TV, or I could do something productive. And so I decided to start using that time to write. It was something I've always wanted to do. I did major in English in college. I'd always been an avid reader. Tom Clancy is probably one of my all-time favorites. I've read all the books. And so I just, kind of thought back on my career in the Navy and I really thought, I don't want to necessarily tell my story about what I did, because I think one common theme among most people who have served, most veterans, is that they'll say, like, I wasn't anything special, but I saw some special people. And so that's kind of how I view it. So instead of telling my story and I wanted to tell the stories of others, but I wanted to do it in a fictional sense. So the characters in my story, and the Battleborn is really designed to kind of bring awareness to what people are doing on a daily basis, both in the military and in our intelligence community. And, but of course, being a fighter pilot, I wanted to have, fighter pilots kind of front and center. I think fiction lacks a lot of that right now. I mean, growing up, we had Dale Brown, we had Stephen Koontz. They were always telling stories To this day, some of the best, Flight of the Intruder, Flight of the Old Dog, those were some of the best aviation centered stories. The 80s and 90s, there was a lot of that, but we don't really have that too much anymore. And so I was like, well, we need to bring some of this aviation back, and so my main character in the Battleborn series is a Navy Top Gun fighter pilot, and he sort of represents the military aspect of my story. And then I have kind of a secondary main character who is a Navy NCIS counterintelligence officer agent. And so she's kind of trying to catch spies, whether they be Chinese or Russian or whatever. And so the two worlds kind of come together in my stories. And I find that enjoyable, but I also find it educational, which is one of the things I enjoyed about reading Clancy, is that I learned something about the military. I learned how the military worked, how the Navy worked, how ships worked, how nuclear reactors worked. I mean, whatever, you name it. I always found that fascinating, and so I wanted to provide a little bit of that in my books as well.
Yeah, and I think, was your first book Unknown Rider, and was it a bestseller?
Yeah, Unknown Rider. The audiobook was a bestseller. Well, the book itself, number one in several categories. Military thriller, espionage. There were some others, but on audio, it peaked at number 4 on Audible. So from every single title out there that Audible had, it reached number 4, and I was super excited about it. I give a lot of that credit to the narrator. Ray Porter he is an amazing narrator, and he really, a good narrator, and he's not the only one, but a good narrator, really brings life to a story. And so I'll go back and I'll listen to his narration of my books, and I'm like, man, this is good, and it's not because of my writing, it's because of his narration. He does different voices for the different characters. He does accents, and yeah, so that was really good. He narrates all 4 of these books, and he's narrating the new series I have coming out in May that I'm co-authoring with somebody, and so I'm really excited about the future.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about that. What's coming up, and what can we expect to see?
Yeah, so like I said, in May I've got a new series out with Tyndale. It's called Silent Horizons, and that's the name of the series, and the first book is also Silent Horizons. I'm co-authoring it with a guy named Chad Robichaux. He was a Marine Force Recon guy. He did some stuff with the same Special Operations Task Force that I was a part of. And post-military, he had some issues with PTSD. He got into professional mixed martial arts fighting, and was kind of going downward spiral from PTSD. And so he ended up starting a foundation called Mighty Yokes, which helps veterans with PTSD. And he focuses a lot now on his engagement with people on the issue of resilience. I know that he has he went over to Afghanistan after we pulled out and kind of surrendered to the Taliban. He went over there to get his interpreter's family out, ended up working with other countries and raising money so that he ended up saving 17,000 people. Not him alone. There was a team, but he sort of spearheaded it. Ended up getting 17,000 people out of Afghanistan that were going to be, targeted by the Taliban. And he's been over to Ukraine several times to kind of work with their military on the issue of resilience. And because the way he puts it is he's like, I don't care if Zelensky's corrupt, or I don't care if what government is corrupt. The people who are sent to war, who are actually fighting, who are actually suffering, they're just doing their job. They're trying to do their job and come home to their family. So he's out there trying to make sure that they do that. He's not getting into the big geopolitical aspect of it, and
the human factor side.
Yeah, he's looking at the human side of it. So he's doing some great things. The purpose of this series that we're writing is really to kind of address the people. We see a lot of it. We see a lot of veterans that sort of feel lost. They don't really know. Maybe I'm feeling a certain way, and I can't explain it. I don't know why. And so we're trying to reach out to those people and to give them hope. So the series is really a message of hope. Our main character struggles with that. Our main character, he's not that hero that goes out there and just, kicks ass and goes home and sleeps well. No, he's plagued by nightmares. He's plagued by anxiety attacks. He's having, difficulty juggling his responsibility as a husband, as a father, with his responsibility as a soldier. And so that's what we're trying to do with this series. So it's one that I'm super proud of. We dedicated it to 4 individuals that both Chad and I served with, who lost their lives, and we named characters after them. So it's a very personal story, and we just can't wait for it to get out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And where we can find you online in your books, do you think your books and the one that's upcoming, can anyone read it, or do you have to be into military aviation?
No, absolutely not. I think I think that the person who is into military aviation will recognize the authenticity and will get a little bit more of an inside look at what life is like. But I was at a book event last week, and there was a woman who owns a store, and she's in her 80s, and she said, "I've never really thought I wanted to know what it was like flying a fighter jet, but then I read your book and I know exactly what it's like."
Oh, wow.
And so the biggest compliment that I get is that somebody who has no experience or exposure to the military can really get a glimpse of what it's like, both as a military pilot, or as maybe a Navy SEAL, or Marine Force Recon, or whatever it is. I'm trying to give them an idea of what it's like, because I'm really focused on the human element of it. And so you don't have to know anything about it. You don't have to have a background, but if you do have a background in it, I think you'll recognize the authenticity and know that it came from somebody that's been there.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can we find the books and yourself online?
Yeah, so my website is jackstewartbooks.com. There's links to all my books on there. I know that Amazon carries all the books. As far as distribution in actual bookstores in the U.S., Barnes and Noble does carry my series. They're not widely distributed, so that the best bet is going online and ordering it from. You can order it from Barnes and Noble. You can order it from Books A Million, Amazon, whatever. Overseas, I'm not sure if you have to go through Amazon to do it, but hopefully Silent Horizons is going to be a little bit more widely distributed, so they should be in more bookstores and all over the country.
Great stuff, and all them links will be in the description below. But a couple of easy ones to wrap up here, Jack. Do you have any hobbies?
Writing books. Seriously, most of my hobbies now, revolve around my kids' activities. My older son, he plays water polo, and so I'm spending a lot of time going to tournaments with him, and I enjoy watching the game. So that's probably one of my biggest hobbies. But I do like projects. I was just tinkering with a watch, replacing a band on a watch. I like watches. I like cars that I tinker with, but I don't do too much with that. Mainly just spending time with my family.
Great stuff. Probably know the answer to this one, but sometimes we get a surprise answer. So, favorite aircraft you've flown?
Yeah, it has to be the F-18. Yeah, I wish I could give you a surprise answer, but I can't. Yeah, I mean, the F-18, the one thing I love about it is, I haven't flown it in 2 years, but I know that I could sit in it tomorrow and start it up and fly, and it would feel just like home to me. That was the one thing I loved about it. I knew that plane inside and out, and I was really comfortable in it.
One you would like to fly, either past or present?
Oh, man. Gosh, if I had to pick one, I think I'd pick the F4 Phantom. It's like the ugliest plane, but also the most sexy in my opinion. Like it's just built for speed.
A brick with engines, isn't it?
Oh man, exactly. It just, there's something about it I've always found fascinating about that airplane.
Great stuff. And one last question: is there a where people, our viewers, can reach you and talk to you directly? Is there Instagram, Twitter there? Maybe they can talk to you and get some advice, or where to find your books.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the easiest way of doing it, I do respond to every email that I get. So I'll get messages through my website. There is an opportunity, a place you can go on the website. You can fill out a form, this little contact form with your email address. I will respond to all those. Instagram and, X, I guess they're calling it. If you follow me on there, I do respond to messages. But that's started to do that a little bit less in favor of the email. So go to my website, follow me on social media, and I do my best to try to interact with everyone.
Great stuff. Well, Jack, thank you very much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.